Hi, I'm Sam. It's stop motion story time. This is the story of my 5th edition party and their experience with a certain magic item. A rare, wondrous item. The bag of beans. The party consisted of a human cleric named Niels, an orc barbarian named Rend, a wood elf ranger named Malik, and a half-elf warlock named Tanis. These are the minis that will represent our characters. The members of the adventuring party, the Fools Errant. We began our story in a familiar forest town called Wellwood. Now don't worry, this was a few years after my first attempt at a campaign and the slate had been wiped clean. If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe check out my first video here. The party was just passing through town, and they were only staying for a few days. While they were there, they were resupplying and looking for a magic shop. Now, Wellwood is no bustling city. It's a lumber town in the middle of the Lacus Timberlands. This isn't a place where a magic shop could be found in my setting, but when the townsfolk told them that there was no magic shop, they seemed pretty disappointed. They had been trying to find a magic shop for some time now, and it seemed like they were getting frustrated. So the person they were talking to told them that while there was no magic shop in town, there was an old shaman that lived near the edge of the woods. This old woman had a collection of all kinds of things, from salves and a few potions to some strange and rare items that may be magical. When they were told this, they wasted no time seeking out this old shaman woman. This meant that I would have no time to prepare what this small hovel shop had in it. So I cracked open the magic items section of the DM's guide and chose a few random magic items that seemed mostly harmless and weren't above rare. One of those items happened to be a bag of beans. I thought it sounded funny, and didn't bother to read the description. That was a mistake. Now, when they were asking what all the items did, I gave them a vague description and said that all the old woman had told them about the beans specifically was that they held magic in them, and that there were 7 beans in the bag. They bought a few bits and bobs, including the bag of beans, and they went on their way. Now, any DM that knows this item knows that it's a recipe for shenanigans. Some wacky stuff can definitely come from the addition of these beans, and it didn't take long for things to start happening. The first incident happened with just 2 of the party members, Rend and Tanis. We were having some scheduling problems, but we really wanted to play, so I just had 2 players that day. They were really curious about what the beans did, and with a successful Arcana check from Tanis, they found out not to pour the beans out of the bag, and that they needed to plant them for the magic to work correctly. So they walked out into the woods, and they planted 1 each. The first bean planted caused some toadstools to grow from the ground. They didn't really think anything of that, seemed pretty harmless. The second bean planted caused a nest of 1d4 plus 3 eggs to grow out of the ground. They got 5 eggs. This confused the players, and they wondered what to do with the eggs. I was starting to realize the kinds of things that could happen when they planted these beans, and I was getting a little bit nervous. These were not normal eggs. If you ate one, you had to make a DC 20 Constitution saving throw, and if you succeeded, your lowest ability score would increase by 1. If you failed, however, you would take 10d6 damage from a magical explosion the egg made. When they both tried eating an egg, they quickly realized how dangerous it was, and Tanis failed her save. After taking the 10d6 magical explosion damage, she was at very low HP. This just further intrigued Rend. He ate another egg and made the save, causing his intelligence of 6 to raise to a 7. They decided to both try another time. This resulted in Tanis going unconscious, causing Rend to use a potion to get her back from the brink of death. They then camped out in the woods and slept to regain their strength. The next day, for some reason, they decided to plant 1 more bean. They found the perfect spot in the woods, and they dug a tiny hole for it. Then I rolled a 14 on the random table. A tree ant sprouts. There's a 50% chance that the tree ant is chaotic evil and attacks. I did what I normally did with 50% chances in D&D and had them call heads or tails in the air when I flipped a coin. This is when the bag of beans truly became infamous. It was evil. This led to a very short fight and a very long escape, as they realized they would never be able to beat the tree ant with just the 2 of them. As they were running, they were hit by not just 1, but 2 of the rocks that it threw at them, 1 for each of them. The first hit Tanis, and one-shot her. Rend had to use a second potion to get her back on her feet. While he was doing that, another rock was flung at them and only missed by a foot or 2. They began to run again. As they fled, another rock was thrown. This one hit Rend and he almost went down as well. They dashed away, barely clinging to life. They escaped by the skin of their teeth. Now afterward, they remembered that they were carrying the group's bag of holding and that they had not told anybody where they were going. They were one rock away from dying and losing all of the party's money and loot. We ended the game there that day. The next time we played, Malik the Ranger was there to join the fun. I was stalling until we had our full group to continue the main quest, so I sent them on a little B-plot quest to kill an elemental that was messing with the weather. After they completed that, they brought up the bag of beans to Malik. Of course they did. Why wouldn't they? And obviously they had to plant some more. The first one they planted spawned a handful of shrieker fungus that thoroughly startled the party and then were quickly squashed. Then on the second one, things took a turn for the worst again. I rolled a 96 on the random table and then read the description silently to myself. This causes a pyramid with a 60-foot base to burst upward. Inside is a sarcophagus containing a mummy lord. At first I thought maybe I would lie about the roll and just say it was something else, but fudging rolls has never really been my style. So I told them what happened, flavoring it to fit the area that they were in. The ground shook as a stone temple rose from the dirt, 3 levels protruding from the ground, and a stairway leading up to a door at the top. They were very surprised by this. I told them that as they approached, they felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Now thankfully this caused them to stray away from the idea of going inside. But I guess they weren't done with the beans because they decided to plant another one. And out of all of the things they could have gotten, they got another nest of eggs. This time, luckily with only 4 eggs. Obviously they all had to try their luck at an egg, and Rend was the only one to succeed, raising his 7 intelligence to a whopping 8. After that, the group left the woods and went back to town. That session ended there, and the next time we played, we had a full party. Niels had come back, and was very confused about what the other people in the party were telling him. He got pretty mad about how reckless they had been while he was gone, but they hadn't told him about the eggs yet. Rend then thought it would be very funny if at breakfast he had Tanis cook up one of the special eggs for Niels. As he ate it, I told him to roll a con save. He was pretty confused by that, but he rolled anyway, failing the save. So the magic egg explosion knocked him unconscious, dealing 10d6 damage as it did before. After they woke him up, he was pretty pissed off. He lectured them on how irresponsible they had been, and they started to feel bad about pranking him. Rend gave him the final egg as some sort of peace offering, but he decided to throw it out into the middle of the street, breaking the final egg. When that whole ordeal was over, he convinced the party that they needed to go clean up the mess that they had made. When they got back to the woods where the treant had been, it was nowhere to be seen. It's almost like sentient things move on their own. So they moved on to the temple instead. When they arrived at the temple, the same sense of dread washed over them, but their guilt overcame it this time, and with the cleric leading the charge, they entered the stone temple. Now I knew that the party was definitely not ready for this dungeon, but I didn't just want to outright say it, so I tried to make it get more and more difficult the deeper they went in. But there was one problem with this. The cleric was leading the way, and all of the enemies were undead. They were just barreling through all of the enemies I put there to scare them off. They fought through the first 3 floors of undead with little trouble at all, and then made it to a room that I thought would stop them in their tracks. I had prepared a room with well over 50 undead that had been entombed there, and when you walked within a close enough range, they would awake. At first, this was definitely going to work. They were fighting slowly through the room and using up their abilities and being worn down. But then the cleric had an idea. It was a good idea too. Rascal. They huddled up in the room above, and he explained how the spell Spirit Guardians worked. Wait a moment. Let me get to the book. You call forth spirits to protect you. They flit around you to a distance of 15 feet for the duration. If you are good or neutral, their spectral form appears angelic or fey, your choice. If you are evil, they appear fiendish. When you cast this spell, you can designate any number of creatures that you can see to be unaffected by it. An affected creature's speed is halved in the area, and when the creature enters the area for the first time on a turn, or starts its turn there, it must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 3d8 radiant damage, or 3d8 necrotic if you're evil. On a successful save, the creature takes half as much damage. So he cast the spell and led the players through the winding hall of undead. They ran through the passage like a battering ram and didn't lose any momentum. The undead were failing most of the rolls and being destroyed, and the ones that weren't were just cleaned up as the other party members ran by. It was such a good plan, but they were getting too close for their own good, and I really didn't want to just tell them that they should leave. So after they had destroyed all the undead on that floor, they made their way to the next set of stairs. As they got closer, I told them that a more powerful sense of dread washed over them, and they all had to make wisdom saves against fear. Luckily, they failed and ran up to the next room. But then a few minutes later, the cleric asked if he still felt afraid. Not realizing why he was asking, I said no. After a couple minutes, it wore off. After I told him that, Niels convinced the party to try again. So they went back to the stairs, and this time they succeeded the saves due to some smart casting of Bless. Great job, Niels. It was a good idea, actually. They slowly made their way into the final chamber, where a big sarcophagus sat at the other end of the room. At this point, I was almost sure that I was about to have a TPK on my hands. I didn't know what to do, and my attempts to hint that it was too dangerous were being thwarted by Niels and his cleric ways. They moved closer to the sarcophagus, and when they got to a certain distance, it sprang open, revealing a mummy lord. Then came the mummy lord's turn. It used its dreadful glare to frighten and paralyze the cleric. Niels was stuck. Oh crap, this is bad. It then used its rotting fist on him, and because he was paralyzed, it crit and reduced his health to 0. Things were looking pretty dire. Luckily, when I was setting up this dungeon, I had decided that the mummy lord was not at full power, because it had just come into existence. I just had to justify it somehow so I didn't kill my party with mummy rot. So Niels was on the ground next to the mummy, and the group had very few options. Tanis had one last potion, and they figured that Rend had the best chance of surviving an attack from the mummy. So Tanis and Malik ran as Rend took and fed the potion to Niels. After that, he still had movement luckily, so he ran as far as he could from the mummy lord. This provoked an attack of opportunity, but luckily he was not able to use his dreadful glare on Rend yet, so the attack was just normal. He took it like a champ and kept running. Now it was Niels' turn, and he got up and used his action to dash and get out of there. By random fate, the mummy was slower than they were, so it couldn't catch up to them, and they got out of the temple, just barely keeping their cleric alive. Okay, good. Thank the gods. When they got outside, they turned around to see that the mummy was not able to leave the temple. When they got back to town, they told everybody to avoid the stone temple in the forest, as it was very dangerous. Later on down the road, after they defeated the big bad of that arc, they decided to plant the final bean. There was one left. I really don't know why they did that, but at this point I was just happy that that was the last of the beans. This bean attracted a hungry Belette, but luckily, with the addition of a new party member, a Goliath monk named Belatos, they were able to handle that. They dispatched it and took its armored hide, thus ending the Bag of Beans saga. Just a bit of information I learned from this experience. Always read the item description before you give something to your players. Now, I don't regret giving them the bag. Everything that happened with the beans was funny and fun and made for really good memories. I just definitely wasn't prepared for the madness that ensued. But hey, that's D&D. If you enjoyed this video, why not like, comment, and subscribe? And if there's a next time, I'll see you there.